Thank you for your attention. Grab my microphone. All right, these last meetings, we will have full agendas, and so we will do what we can to make sure that we start on time and keep moving through as expediently as we can. So thank you for joining us today. Let's see, our first order of business is to approve the minutes from Tuesday, March 5th. And Representative Lee, have you had a moment to review the minutes, and would you please motion?
I move to approve the minutes from March 5th.
All right, thank you, Representative Lee. Any discussions on the minutes from March 5th? All right, hearing no discussion, all in favor of approving the minutes from March 5th, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, minutes are approved. Thank you. All right. And we're ready to move into position. The first bill that we have on the agenda, and we might be moving things around a little bit today. We've had some conflicts that have arisen with different bill presenters, but I think we're ready to start with House File 4512, Representative Berg. If you will please move forward. And I think you might have some testifiers that will want to be getting ready to at the same time.
Yes.
Thank you, Representative Berg. All right, so thank you, Representative Berg, for presenting the bill today. It is our intention to lay it over for further consideration, but we're glad that you were able to come forward today and start this discussion. So as a member of the committee, Representative Berg, can you please motion House File 4512 before the committee to be laid over for further consideration?
Yes, Madam Chair, I so move.
All right, thank you. All right, well, please proceed.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Before I begin, I just want to say that this bill is the start of a conversation. And I think it's important that we recognize that the intent of the bill is to start the conversation and then do good work to make sure that we are honoring the intent of it and including everyone that needs to be included. So this bill builds upon the bill that we passed last session, House File 8, to put school support personnel in every school in the state. And part of the intent of the bill was to ensure our student staff and the families of our students had access to the resources they needed to thrive, as well as to ensure that our current school support personnel have what they need to do their work in the way that they ultimately want to and need to. And so in initial conversations, that's where the student support personnel ratio comes in. The ratio of 250 students to one school counselor is recommended by the American School Counselor Association, but here in Minnesota, we have more than double that in many of our schools, and we do rank 47th out of 50 states for our ratios. We are failing our students and their families and our current devoted school support personnel. This bill was originally written for our school counselors addressing their ratio issues, but it applies to our school social workers, our school psychologists as well. It is through each of these support personnel, academic and career planning, support services experts, that we achieve a holistic approach to meeting the needs of our students. With the current lack of all student support personnel in many of our schools, the scopes of practice lines have gotten a little blurred, which is why we need to continue to have this conversation so we can meet the needs of the whole child. Being able to at least have the conversation around the recommended ratios is also necessary to recruit and retain school support personnel. In House File 8, we built a pipeline into the profession. However, it is difficult to entice students to enter any of these fields if they are looking at 1,000 students to just one of them. This is a deterrent that affects how we serve our students for generations to come and continues to exacerbate the issue that our current support personnel are facing. We can and must do better. Since introducing this bill and preparing for this hearing. I've had conversations with different types of support personnel, each bringing their perspective into this conversation, and I just want to assure everyone that this is, as I said, the beginning of the conversation. We are looking at improving the language as I'm learning more about the language and the scope of practice for all of the student support personnel that we hope to have in our schools. And that is why I talk about a holistic approach, because it only works when we have all of the different personnel in place to take a student and their families through each step that they may need. So with that being said, I believe I have some testifiers.
Madam Chair Pryor, committee members.
Sorry, that was my cue to recognize you. Thank you. I was slow, and I appreciate you were right on the spot. So I believe our first testifier is Keeler Colors, the Minnesota School Counselor of the Year. Congratulations. Thank you for being with us from St. Paul Public Schools. So please identify yourself for the record and begin.
Thank you, Madam Pryor, Chair Pryor, and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity today to talk with you about two very important priorities of the Minnesota School Counselor Association outlined in House File 4512. My name is Keeler Coolers. I am the 2022 Minnesota School Counselor of the Year. Last year, the passage of House File 8 allocated more aid for student support professionals, and it was an incredible investment towards a brighter mental health future for students. Now is the time for us to refine state law on our role description and allocation of that funding towards more effective student counselor ratios. To illustrate, I have had the opportunity this year to work in an elementary school that had never invested in a school counseling position before the availability of ARP and House File 8 funding streams. But I also am the only school counselor in a building that educates over 800 students. Caseload sizes like this exist all across our state, and our youngest learners and youth deserve better. Minnesota has been at the bottom of the country for our student counselor ratios for decades. At 577 to 1, we are over double the American School Counselor Association's recommended ratios and 1.5 times that of the national average. Ratios matter because several studies have noted that effective school counselor ratios increase student attendance, GPA, test scores, graduation rates, and decrease disciplinary infractions. You may feel uncertain about the bold ask to recommend ratios, but our ask to strengthen those student counselor ratios is not a suggestion that it should be at the expense of other student support positions. This is not an either-or equation, it is a both-and. Schools and students need a team of multidisciplinary support professionals to create a true package of proactive MTSS. However, school counselors and our unique focus on on Tier 1 services that all students receive as a part of their regular educational programming, mean that we're often the first stop for students and families to reach out for support. Effective ratios means more students have access to get support earlier. Our second priority highlighted in House File 4512 is to strengthen state statute language that defines the school counselor role. This will be a significant advocacy tool for the 760 practicing school counselors in Minnesota, and it will create transparency and consistency in practices across our state. The proposed language we present today is the product of state school counselor leaders collaborating to frame a definition of the school counselor role that is drawn from best, most current practices and outlined in our national association. When those practices happen, student outcomes improve and school communities are strengthened. School counseling has evolved a lot in the last couple of decades. We work in proactive and comprehensive ways to support student learning, with a targeted focus on equity for all students to succeed. Effective ratios and a strongly defined role description better equips us to do what we are trained to do, and it makes a difference for students. Thank you for hearing my testimony today.
Thank you. Thank you for testifying with us. Next up, I have from Minnesota School Counselors Association, Callie Moreau. you can identify yourself and begin when you're all set up and ready to go.
Hello, committee members. My name is Callie Moreau, and I'm a licensed school counselor at Central Middle School in White Bear Lake. I'm currently serving as the president-elect for the Minnesota School Counselor Association. Thank you, Representative Berg, for inviting me here today to share my experience as a school counselor and testify in support of House File 4512. Last year, the Minnesota School Counselor Association, in collaboration with Representative Berg, Minnesota school social workers, school nurses, school psychologists, and school chemical health specialists, successfully advocated for additional aid for student support personnel. While 2023 was amazing with the amount of bills passed, this year is important that legislators focus on correctly implementing those bills. One way to do this would be through legislation that clearly defines the role of school counselors and ratios for caseloads based on American School Counseling Association ASCA evidence-based recommendations. House File 4512 helps define our role and sets a goal for student-to-school counselor ratios to 250-1. This would be a huge step forward for our state, where caseloads average over 500-1. Our neighboring states have student-to-counselor ratios that are more than 200 students less. And while Minnesota prides ourselves on being a state that values education, we are not upholding this value with such limited access for our students to receive developmentally appropriate, proactive, preventative, data-driven, and equity-focused support from their school counselor. Last week, I recorded how I spent my days using ASCA's use of time calculator. It recommends that school counselors spend 80% of their time in student-related services. Last week, I spent about 75% of my time supporting students, while the other 25% was related to program management and fair share duties. Some highlights of my week included spending time with over 20 eighth grade students, advising them on their high school and post-secondary plans, multiple individual counseling sessions with various students about personal, social, or family issues, implementing a breather break intervention for 6 students that often miss or leave class due to stress, conducting 2 risk reviews for students dealing with suicide ideation, as well as spending valuable time in consultation with other student support personnel to ensure we are working collaboratively and efficiently to meet the needs of all our middle school students. To say the least, I was exhausted. While my numbers are close to ASCA's recommended time, they are not quite where they could be, and I know many of my school counseling colleagues around the states would agree that they could do better work if our roles were clearly defined at the state level, which would encourage school districts to develop school counseling programs that allow for Minnesota students to have access to a licensed school counselor, no matter their grade level or geographical location. I understand that some people may be in opposition or hesitant about supporting this bill, but I strongly believe if we start by setting this standard for our school districts in regards to school counselors, it will positively and greatly impact not only school counselors, but the other student support personnel in our state to work more collaboratively and effectively to meet the varying level of needs in our school communities. We need to start somewhere in defining these critical roles in schools, and Minnesota School Counselor Association is willing to stand behind this bill and work towards statewide systemic change for how we all work together to support our students in Minnesota to being successful and productive members in our communities. Thank you for your time and consideration in supporting this bill.
Thank you for your testimony. Next up, I have, as public testimony, Valerie Doslin. If you can identify yourself, the association that you represent, and proceed.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Valerie Doslin, and I represent the Minnesota Association of School Administrators. But I'm also here speaking on behalf of the Association of Metropolitan School Districts, the School Boards Association, and the Elementary and Secondary Principals Associations. Thank you, Representative Berg, for your time yesterday to talk about our concerns, and more importantly, for your work to obtain the student support personnel funding last session. Our school districts understand the important role that school counselors play in supporting our students. However, we are opposed to putting into statute counselor to staff ratios. While House File 4512 currently encourages a 251 to staff ratio, we believe that will lead to future mandated ratios. Such imposed ratios will strain already limited resources in schools and not give school districts the flexibility needed to make staffing decisions. I'm sure many of you have heard from your own school districts about the financial challenges they face, even with the new funding received last session. Just this week, AMSD announced that 70% of its member districts have a projected budget shortfalls for the 24-25 school year of over $300 million. Instead of focusing on ratios, we would like to work with Representative Berg on continuing to ensure the funding is sufficient so that districts are able to hire school counselors and other support staff. I have two other suggestions for your consideration. First of all, allow districts to hold in reserve student support aid, and I do know a bill is coming to do that, but districts are having difficulty filling these positions because of historic staff shortages. As a result, the student support dollars you passed last session are not being spent for their intended purposes. Allowing districts to reserve this funding can give them additional time to fill these positions. Secondly, increase the current $40,000 minimum aid guarantee. $40,000 is simply insufficient for a district to employ a full-time student support staff. Again, this means more unspent student support personnel dollars. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and we look forward to working with Representative Berg further on this issue.
Thank you. Well, we have no more testifiers, so we'll turn to member discussion. Representative Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Berg. And thank you to the testifiers. Fantastic job. It's the work that, and the testifier that outlined her day. I was listening to her and I thought, yep, that's the job of a counselor there. I mean, you know, meeting the needs of kids, meeting with kids that are in crisis, that's the job that our school counselors, our social workers do every single day. I think one of the testifiers said something, they said, it's not an either or, but a both and that's great in theory. But we had another testifier talk about, 70% of the districts are going to be reducing funds up to $300 million in, that's the reality. So when we at this table, and I've talked about this a lot, when we tell school districts how they need to spend money, how they need to do things, we're tying their hands on it. And they talked about, Ms. Doslin talked about the $40,000, that being the floor. That is true. You can't hire a counselor, social worker with $40,000. So opening up flexibility for how schools access those funds is critical. So I'm glad to hear there's a bill coming to open up flexibility. I have some ideas on that. But I too have concerns when we start telling districts and mandating ratios, whether it be class size, whether it be a student support ratio, because that may not fit. And you and I talked about that. That may not fit the needs of our local school. We may have another way to address those needs. So obviously very much value our anyone who works with our students. But when we start telling districts how they need to spend the money, it ties their hands.
Thank you, Representative Baker. I'm going to turn to Representative Keeler.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Representative Berg. I guess, one, thank you for continuing to show up to support the need for counselors. We know that a lot of our kids really struggle with mental health needs and they don't have access always in their community. So I do appreciate your efforts. You and I talked about it kind of similar to what the principal was saying, that, putting money towards it is how we continue to have these positions long term. And what we don't want to do is just have some counselors, 1 year and then they're gone. So the longevity of it is really important. But more than that, I just wanted to take a moment because when I meet with my students, one of the first things I ask is if they know that we put the 988 number on the back of their student IDs. And a lot of my students in Moorhead didn't know that. And so this is just like a plug that for the counselors and the individuals who are maybe listening to this, like really make sure your students at least know that they have access to that and that we did that. It should be on all of their student IDs because we do know that feeling of suicide and suicide attempts are increasing pretty dramatically in the state. So thank you for your work on this.
Thank you. Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a question, if I could, and Representative Berg, thank you for this. I believe school counselors are incredibly important, and you're right, we don't have enough of them right now, but it's a tough situation to deal with, and we have to make sure we're not overwhelming our schools. But I have a question, just on how this bill relates to last year's legislation. We had the student support personnel aid, which is to help address the shortage of student support staff, including school counselors and so on, financial aid for schools and that type of thing. And I'm just wondering, with the expansion of the definition of school counselor in this bill, it really increases the scope of what a school counselor has traditionally done, guidance counselor, career counseling, that kind of thing. All important areas, but in expanding this definition, I mean, a lot of the things required almost sound like a school psychologist type of thing, mental health counseling, holding small group counseling, focus on mental health and so on. And then including collecting and analyzing school data. I could go on, but everybody can read the bill. So how will this impact a school's ability to utilize the funding that was passed last year? It seems like this is going to limit the pool of school counselors that a school could hire using that funding. So this is kind of a double question. One is it going to impact that? Two, are there a lot of school counselors out there that have all of these characteristics, which sound like a combination of school psychologist and school counselor? I guess I'll stop right there.
Okay, will you have a testifier in? Help us with that issue.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll take a quick stab at it, but then we'll have the expert also weigh in. So when we worked on House File 8, we had a coalition of school counselors, school psychologists, social workers, practitioners, and school nurses, because we recognized that there were many schools across the state that either had none of those there or had only, a psychologist or a social worker, a counselor. So it was my understanding that in a lot of ways, the lack of student support personnel meant that those scopes of practice lines were blurred, and we were asking much more of our school counselors maybe than we should have. And then working on this bill, which was to build upon House File 8 and talk about how we can, first of all, encourage students through the pipeline that we built into House File 8 to come into it and make it a more enticing field, whereas before it seemed very overwhelming. So we wanted to do that. And then we just wanted to make sure that our current school counselors and other support personnel had manageable workloads and caseloads. Now, the conversations that I've had since both House File 8 and this bill have been very informative for me in terms of maybe being more informed about what each support personnel did, and how, the possibility that ratios might not be the way to go, but more looking at the caseload versus the workload. So again, this bill is the start of the conversation of that, because I'm getting more and more information, and I want to make sure that I'm taking all of that in and we're doing what is right for the whole child, which means meeting the needs through the different personnel in the way that it should be, so that ultimately the student and their families benefit from it. Having said that, because I'm still learning, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly.
Madam Chair, is it all right if I address the floor? Callie Moreau, school counselor, White Bear Lake. So to answer your questions about how, when you looked at the definition of our job and our scope and sequence that we do as school counselors, you are correct in saying that there's some things that might look similar to what a school psychologist or a school social worker does. There is a lot of overlap between our roles and how we support students' mental health and well-being at school. And I am thankful that I work on a team in White Bear that is collaborative and we work together. We clearly have a a definition of what our roles are, what our expertise are, and how we rely on one another. That's not always the case in other schools and other districts, which is unfortunate because we end up battling each other or feeling animosity towards one another instead of working together to best support our students. So school counselors have been trained. We all have a master's degree that has at least 60 credits in programming, along with up to 700 hours in internship hours. So it looks a lot different than maybe the former days of guidance counselors and the limiting roles that we did. I think one of the things that stands out to me about school counselors that varies and why we are an important part of that puzzle, of that three kind of trifecta of student support, is that we are there for the needs of all students. Like Keeler said earlier, we are often usually that first line of defense or support for a student because we service all students. So for example, a lot of times our social workers or our psychologists are working more with our tier 2 or tier 3 students, our special ed students, but school counselors are equipped, educated, have expertise in meeting the needs of all students. So we will go in and do classroom lessons on things like study skills and how to be prepared for high school. We might go in and do a lesson. I just did one on size of the problem and how to like match our reaction to the size of the problem, talking about social media and the impact of that in a middle school setting. We will also do the career and college planning for students, and that can start as young as kindergarten, getting them thinking about careers. And so that's where our role looks a little bit different. And without all three, we aren't going to find as much success with our students.
All right, thank you. And follow-up.
Follow-up, please, Madam Chair. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Very interesting. I mean, gives me more respect yet for school counselors and what they do. Does the current can't even talk right now, school counselor license encompass all of these things? You're shaking your head, yes.
Yes, can I address back? Okay.
Okay, so,
That's my
and some of
question.
this could be that we just need to, as we said, continue the conversation. We're starting it, and we know that it is nuanced and in depth what we're doing right now. We appreciate how the information that you presented, and you know, if we can have a brief, I think
shook her
maybe
head
one
yes.
more.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. It's aligned with our national model, and all school counselors in Minnesota should be striving to do all of those things that are listed as our duties and have been trained to do so.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Just final comment,
Good.
Madam Chair.
Good clarification, thank you. And yes, thank you, Representative
So
Bennett.
my final comment is, I think all these things are wonderful, but I am concerned that our pool is so short and small right now for school counselors, well, all teachers in education areas, that we're going to limit it even more with all of these qualifications that need to happen. Also wondering with, and you don't need to answer this, but throwing out concerns, current guidance counselors who are basically guidance counselors, how will this affect them if this does go into law? You don't need to answer that, but I think there are a lot of questions, and I want to make sure that what we do doesn't have the unintended consequence of limiting even more the number of school counselors who are available who have licenses. So thanks so much for the presentation.
Thank you for your comments, Representative Bennett, and that essentially is, you know, one reason why we're bringing forward the bill today, to know the questions that are coming forward that we should be answering. So we'll go to you, Representative Berg, for closing remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as I said, had a lot of really good conversations with a number of stakeholders. And I'm beginning to learn a lot more about what each one does. Again, I said in my remarks, and Callie said, that it's really the group effort. So it might start with the school counselor and progress on that there's a need for the student to go to the school psychologist, and then the school social worker will be able to come in and provide resources for the student and their family. So it is really the collective, holistic piece that makes any of this possible. So as I'm learning about this, I'm very open to all the conversations that need to happen, including Principal Berg and anybody else who I would be very grateful to learn from. And I just want to, as we talk about the spirit of this bill, is to place a lot of honor and respect and effort and attention to making sure that our school support personnel can have what they need, and then ultimately the student and their families have what they need, which is why any of us do anything that we do. So this will be a continuing conversation, work over the interim. I welcome and am open to anyone who can contribute to make this bill even better. And so thank you for allowing me to present this bill and start the conversation, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Berg. And with that, we are laying over, get the, sorry, number right, 3995. Thank you. Nope, that's not, sorry. Let me lay over the right bill. Oh, there we are, 4512. Thank you. Laid over. All right. And I think that we have Representative Clardy is the next bill up, and if you can move to the testifier stand and maybe with your first testifier ready to go next to you. All right, Representative Clardy, thank you for being with us. We have House File 1220, and remember, it's our intention to lay this bill, also lay this bill over for further consideration. And Vice Chair Hill, would you please motion for House File 1220 before the committee?
I'd like to motion House File 1220.
Thank you, Representative Hill. All right, Representative Clardy, thank you for joining us in the committee. If you could introduce your bill to us then.
Thank you for having me, Chair Pryor and committee. So this bill has some really simple solutions to it, but with simple, there's always complication. And being a teacher for a long time, I always look at bills that are student-centered or just like what really affects the students in the building versus the staff, and I'm speaking from a staff person. So this bill, House File 1220, it can have a very large impact, and especially with students of color at high school. And it seeks to measure the world's best workforce in, let me back up a little bit, I'm sorry. So what this bill will do is, the first thing is to look at the 9th grade on track for graduation indicator, and it will serve as an early warning system for schools to identify students that are not on track for graduation. And this will happen early enough so schools can actually do something about it. So while our state on-time graduation rate is 84%, just 74% of Black students, 70% of Latino students, 71% of low-income students, and 65% of EL students, and 66% of special education students are actually graduating at the 4 years mark from our high schools. And so the 9th grade on track measure can help schools target support and interventions early so students can get back on the pathway to graduate on time. So there's at least 15 schools that are using this already for their accountability systems, and I really think it's time for Minnesota to look at it. I have a couple testifiers with me today, one that's remotely, and that's Dr. Allensworth, and she's with the University of Chicago, and her research is the basis of this policy. So she'll talk us through the important tool in supporting high school students. And then I also have next to me the former Minnesota Department of Education Commissioner and current Executive Director of Albert Schenker Institute. We have Mary Catherine Richter, and she's been a strong proponent of this policy for years. So for many years, and historically, people that are underrepresented have been affected by this. This bill will do two things. It will look at the students that are on track to graduation, and then the other thing too is it will look at which students are actually getting access to rigorous coursework like AP placement or IB or PSEO. And we are just looking to get the best results for our students. So I'm going to turn it over at this time to our testifier.
All right, and I believe that we will go to our remote testifier, Dr. Elaine Allensworth. If you can hear us, please unmute and begin.
Okay, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Allensworth. I'm the Executive Director of the University of Chicago Consortium on School Research. So my colleagues and I have conducted many studies on the freshman on-track indicator over the last 2 decades, using administrative data on the population of students in the Chicago public schools. Freshman on track is just a very simple indicator that's primarily based on whether students have passed their classes in their 9th grade year. So we started out with research showing that many students failed classes in the 9th grade year, even students with high test scores, even students who had good grades in the middle grade years. It turns out that school transition years, like 9th grade, the first year of high school, are very critical for whether students eventually graduate. We also found that where students go to school makes a very large difference in terms of whether students eventually graduate. Schools serving very similar populations of students can have very different graduation rates, and you can see which schools will have high or low graduation rates in the future by looking at their freshmen on track rates today. We also found that the strong relationship between freshmen on track and graduation held regardless of students' test scores, backgrounds, what school they attend, and beyond that, all those background characteristics and test scores, they matter for students' graduation because they affect whether students pass their 9th grade classes. But ultimately, if you can support students to have a successful 9th grade year where they pass all their classes, that's what matters for whether they graduate, and it also matters for whether they have high achievement later on in high school and end up ready for college. So the Chicago School District developed an early warning indicator system around freshmen on track so that schools would have data early on in the 9th grade year to help keep students on track so they end the 9th grade year on track and basically prevent failure in that 9th grade year. With those supports, schools set up 9th grade teams to use the data systems, develop strategies, and evaluate the impact of their strategies. And as they started to do that, freshmen on track rates started to improve, and they just kept growing year after year as schools figured out more strategies and learned from each other. And then as those cohorts of freshmen became seniors, graduation rates started to improve, and they kept growing. And within 10 years, graduation rates had increased by over 20 percentage points. And at the same time that we had more students graduating high school, those students had higher achievement than ever before. Higher test scores, higher grade point averages, more AP course taking, higher AP course pass rates, and then more students going to college and earning college degrees. And those changes were primarily driven by the increases in students' 9th grade course performance.
Great, thank you. Thank you for your testimony. And then we have in person, Ms. Mary Catherine Ricker. Thanks for returning.
Thank you, Chair. Chair Pryor and members, thank you so much for the time today. I appreciate being here. My name is Mary Catherine Ricker. I'm really honored to be able to speak in favor of House File 1220. This bill would add a 9th grade tracker to our world's best workforce efforts. I have long been an advocate for meaningful measures of student progress, and this bill does just that. I'm an advocate for meaningfully raising graduation rates, which includes ending the practice of students dropping out of school and the practice of a 9th grade tracker, as identified in this bill, will address both. Because there is clear evidence that careful attention to student academic progress in 9th grade rewards students with greater promise to graduate and makes them less likely to drop out. This measurement is one more way to tell students they are seen and supported in a very critical time in their education. Tracking our 9th graders' progress is also an academic measure that is easy for schools to communicate to students and their families, and easy for students and their families to understand. This understanding creates incredible opportunities for school-family partnerships to be even more meaningful. Tracking this progress provides an important discussion point for students and their families that opens doors to discussing other world's best workforce opportunities, enrolling in rigorous coursework, and experiential learning that includes career exploration. The 9th grade tracker is measuring information that is already collected, courses and grades, with the added benefit of directly applying them to the goal we all share for our students, earning a high school diploma and attaining career and college readiness. I want to thank you for your time today and for your careful consideration of House File 1220.
Thank you for your testimony. We now have 2 public testifiers, and if you can be ready to come forward, I have Mr. Matt Schaefer, and then after that, Scott Kunquist. Please identify yourself for the record. Proceed.
Chair Pryor, members of the committee, good afternoon. I'm Matt Shaver, Policy Director at Ed Allies. I'm here to testify today in support of House File 1220. I want to thank Representative Clardy for ongoing leadership and vision on this bill, as well as Chair Pryor for hearing the student-centered policy proposal that is rooted in research. In preparation for this hearing, I went back and rewatched the last time this bill was heard in House Education Policy Committee, which is almost 3 years ago to the day. And so for those of you who were here on the committee then and are still here now, I have to say you all aged really gracefully, and I want that on the record. That hearing happened at a very different time. It was all virtual. Committee members were zooming in from their homes and offices. Schools were dealing with their first year, attempting to do some semblance of in-person pandemic learning. It was a very different time, but the concerns we heard about the bill then are the same we've been hearing now. That schools are swamped with all kinds of mandates. Implementing the READ Act is a lot. The world's best workforce is onerous and too demanding on districts. Rigorous coursework participation isn't necessarily meaningful data. Requiring specific measures in the world's best workforce infringes on local control. So I have to ask, when will it be a good time to include these measures that matter for kids in our statewide accountability system? This bill proposes to take an existing structure that has been around for a decade, that districts complete on a regular basis, utilizing data that districts already have, and simply focuses what they're measuring, reporting, and planning for in one of 4 aspects of the report. After last year's READ Act legislation removed a whole component, 3rd grade reading, out of it. This only asks LEAs to address this at the high school level. This bill nudges what's already being done just a little bit in a way that is aligned with research that tells us what prepares students for success, namely rigorous coursework and whether students are passing classes in 9th grade. The world's best workforce is local control. It's a local planning process led by community stakeholders to take a hard look at their own data and plan for it and submit a report. This is a good bill, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to support it. Thank you again to Representative Clardy for your leadership. Thank you all for your time today and public service to our state.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer. Mr. Kunquist, if you can come forward and begin with your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. My name is Scott Krunquist with the Association of Metropolitan School Districts, and I'm also speaking today on behalf of MSBA and MASA. I want to thank Representative Clardy. I've had the opportunity to have conversation with her and appreciate her willingness to work with us, and also certainly appreciate and support the goals and intent of the legislation. We just have some concerns about adding additional specific requirements to the world's best workforce. Some of you, I don't know if many of you were around when it was adopted back in 2013, and really the intent at that time was to require school districts to develop a comprehensive, long-term strategic plan addressing 5 key areas at that time: school readiness, closing achievement gaps among all racial and ethnic groups and students living in poverty and not living in poverty, college and career readiness, graduation from high school, and then at the time, 3rd grade reading proficiency, which, as you all recall, was removed from the world's best workforce last year when the READ Act passed. Then at that point, the idea was each district should develop its goals, its timelines, its metrics, its benchmarks for achieving each of those goals. And so we're just hoping that as we move forward, we can maintain that flexibility so that each district can work with their parents, their families, their local communities to develop the benchmarks and metrics that best work for them and will help them accomplish their goals. So I'll stop there, and just we look forward to continuing to work with Representative Clardy and committee members on this as you move forward. Thank you, Madam Chair and members.
Thank you for your testimony. Having no more testifiers, we'll begin with member discussion. Representative Keeler.
Thank you, Chair Pryor. Thank you, Representative Clardy. I carried this bill in the pandemic behind a screen a couple years ago. So still same concerns that people brought up then. Just appreciate you carrying it and moving it forward. It really did a lot for individuals like in our Indian Education Department. I remember 3 years ago, our liaison testified for this bill as well. So it was really important for the underserved communities to really be able to be seen once they make it to high school. So I appreciate you carrying this on.
Thank you. And Representative Feist.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for bringing this bill, Representative Clardy. It's making me have compensatory revenue thoughts and how we define like who it is that we're trying to target with that extra funding. And right now it's people who are not meeting academic standards, and Tim Strom and Christina can correct me, but not meeting academic standards and underprepared to learn, I think, is the two standards. It would be so interesting to be able to add this as well, just to make sure that where we're identifying these needs, we're also tying that to increased funding. So I really like this bill. Thank you.
Representative Bennett.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Rep. Clardy, for carrying this. We all know attendance is hugely important. One caution I would say, or suggestion, first the caution is that whenever we add more bookkeeping work to districts, it adds in the additional staff, office staff, and sometimes takes away from classrooms, so we always have to be careful. I think attendance is a huge priority. I'd love us to find another data collection that maybe isn't as important and we could get rid of, so we could trade it off and they wouldn't have extra work. So that's just my suggestion. Let's find one we could get rid of and make this kind of work neutral for our districts.
Okay, thank you. Closing remarks, Representative Clardy.
Great. Thank you so much for hearing this. When I leave here, and the purpose for me bringing this here is to make sure that all those kids that we're talking about that should be graduating in a 4-year term get the supports from their school, and that the staff gets the help in identifying which kids need the extra assistance. And if we are truly looking at the achievement gap and opportunities for the future, we have to stop and ask ourselves why we wouldn't look at like data that's already there. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Clardy. All right, I'm going to pause for a moment, make sure I'm looking at the right bill number. All right. And with that, Vice Chair Hill renews the motion to lay over House File 1220 for further consideration. Thank you for your presentation, for being with us, Representative Clardy. All right, I believe we do have our next bill author here ready to go. Representative Robbins has House File 3660. And welcome to the committee, and thank you being able to be with us today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for having me. I really greatly appreciate you hearing this bill, and to members of the committee.
And we're going to move it before us right now.
Thank you.
All right. Representative Mueller, would you be ready to move House File 3660 before the committee to lay over for further consideration?
Yes, I would move 3660 in front of the committee now.
Thank you, Representative Mueller. All right. Representative Robbins, please present your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, this is a very simple bill that I think will have tremendous impact on students in our state who struggle with eating disorders, or may not yet struggle, but may be pushed in that direction as they engage in athletics in their youth. So basically, all the bill does is it asks the League of the Minnesota State High School League to provide training to their coaches and assistant coaches, as they already do for licensure, to address eating disorders. And this issue came to my attention. First of all, I'm the mom of 3 daughters, so all of them were involved in youth sports, and they all had different experiences of, coaches saying, oh, you have to eat this or not this or da-da-da-da-da. But that was a limited experience. And when I was doing research on my social media bill, I was stunned at how social media impacts young women in particular, but all youth with eating disorders and driving them further in that rabbit hole. And in that experience, I met Ms. Razdick, who testified in behalf of my bill. And so she's here as an expert on eating disorders, and we've collaborated on this. She supports my work on social media to stem eating disorders, and I'm partnering with her to help our high school league coaches incorporate that in their training.
All right, thank you. And I think we'll hear from our first testifier. Thank you for Lisa Radska for joining us today. And if
Thank
could
you.
Identify yourself and proceed.
Chair Pryor, thank you. Members of the committee, thank you for your service and for being here. I want to thank Representative Robbins very much for her support of the work that many of us in the community are trying to do for kids' health related to food, body image, and eating disorder prevention. As Representative Robbins said, my name is Lisa Radzak. I'm the executive director of Withall, where we work for kids, adolescents, and teenagers so all young people can feel positive in their bodies and with food. We do this because that is essential to health and to things like preventing eating disorders. In addition to what's in your packet, and I do want to say, I know you all get a lot of paper this time of year. There's a cover sheet that has some really key facts that I'm not going to read to you because they're there. So if you would be comfortable looking at that, I would really appreciate it. Also, some letters from folks who care a lot about this issue, including, for those of you that are aware of Jesse Diggins, a gold medalist and incredible athlete, Chad Greenway, a former Minnesota Viking, and then some experts at the University of Minnesota that I have to say, working in eating disorders, all of us, I can't help but say this, in Minnesota should be so proud of some of the experts at the U of M are known around the world for what they've done with eating disorders, and there's some letters from those folks in the packet. I want to add to that, eating disorders are really expensive. They cost the Minnesota economy an estimated $1.1 billion every year, and that's we're just talking about Minnesota. You see some additional information in the packet about that. 10% of Minnesotans will have an eating disorder or have one now, and 95% of the time it starts between the ages of 12 and 25. At least as often, kids experience an eating disorder, or young people, at least as often as they experience a concussion. And a kid with an eating disorder is 12 times more likely to die than a peer that doesn't have an eating disorder. In addition to that, on top of everything I just said, 30% of our girls and 17% of our boys have disordered eating, also known as subclinical eating disorder, which includes things like vaping to lose weight or taking supplements in order to bulk up, these sorts of things. So almost a third of our girls and about a fifth of our boys are in that situation, which is often what comes next is the clinical eating disorder. This is all getting worse, as you may be aware from headlines. This isn't getting better. It continues to get worse and worse. Here's the good news. Eating disorders aren't inevitable. It's kind of mind-boggling, actually. We know how to prevent them, and it doesn't involve things like research for a vaccine or other things. We know now how to prevent them, but we have to be aware of the risk factors and what we all can do to prevent them. And it's not complicated stuff. My organization takes what researchers have known for decades and practitioners that help treat eating disorders, and we try to take it to the masses, try to take it to the average person, boots on the ground, so we can get it to our kids before they have eating disorders. And that's what this bill does. This is about working with an organization like the League of Minnesota State High School League, which is what this bill particularly does, to reach the 240,000 kids that the league's coaches serves, to get them that prevention resource. So those coaches can confidently know how to create the environments in the space. Again, not rocket science, not complicated stuff, some basic information to create the space where our kids can grow without that risk of eating disorders continuing to be growing. Really quick, important last point. Why a statute? Why didn't we just go to the league and say, hey, could you guys do this? Certainly we could have, but the point of the organization that I work with bringing forward the idea of a statute or a bill is to say, perhaps the leaders at the league right now might win the lottery tomorrow, or maybe they retire tomorrow, right? This is about the state saying, let's protect our kids in writing for the long term from illnesses that are so costly and so deadly. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. And we do have someone to represent the league. Mr. Roger Arneson, if you can come forward. And we'd love to hear from you. If you can identify yourself.
Madam Chair and members, my name is Roger Arneson. I represent the Minnesota State High School League, and I want to hear more about hearing that lottery. This is a really good opportunity to come in and talk to you a little bit about the league and about the bill. Had a very nice meeting with Representative Robbins to talk about this. We think this bill is an excellent idea. The committee may not be aware of the fact, but the league is actually responsible for the ongoing education of coaches. We have a 3-year ongoing coaching requirement. We are always looking for things to add into that particular list. I was just pulling it up here, that we want an education-based philosophy, health and safety courses, which this would fall into that, and then effective management of the athletic programs. The high school league is really focused on that we have education-based activities. We think that's really important. One of the things the committee should be aware of, though, is we have a tremendous amount of turnover in coaches. And we are slowly moving away from having teachers as coaches. One of your colleagues, Representative Hewitt, who you know is an official, he says he can always tell when coaches are teachers or not teachers. So we think this is a good piece of legislation. One of the things we want you to be careful about, and Madam Chair, you've had some discussions about this on other topics with us. We don't want to just say, let's do eating disorders. We have a whole host of things. The league does have a 22-member board. We look forward to having anybody come in and talk about that. And we have invited the Pryor testifier to come in and visit with the board as well. So we're going to do this, whether it ends up in your bill or not. And we appreciate Representative Robbins for bringing this forward and talking to us about it. It's a really good opportunity. I might also say that we're in the middle of all of our tournaments right now. So we've got hockey down the block this week, and wrestling just finished. We're going to do some more girls basketball next week. A lot of good things happening. So thank you, Madam Chair. Good opportunity to come and talk about this.
And we appreciate your testimony, especially the words we heard, which is we're going to do this, whether it ends up in the final bill or not. So we appreciate hearing that. Thank you. Representative Keeler.
Oh, is that it? You don't have
No,
any more?
that's it. And then, I'm sorry, I saw actually Representative Lee, you're coming first?
Thank you, Chair. I actually had a question, and I think Mr. Aronson brought this up a little bit earlier, but I do want to thank Rep. Robbins for bringing this bill before us because it is actually a really important issue. So Mr. Aronson talked about the turnover of judges, and I wanted to ask a question either to the author or the staff if there is actually a definition for coaches in statute, just because there is a lot of turnover. So, yeah.
And Mr. Arneson, if you would address that, please.
I'm sorry.
And can you repeat that, Representative Lee?
Yeah, is there a definition for coaches in statute?
Madam Chair, and the answer to that is yes. And we have a head coach requirement. It's a rather loose requirement where you either have the degree or 60 credits towards coaching. And we assist people in moving forward on those. I don't have the site right in front of me, but I can provide that too. But we do. Not the assistant coaches, but for the head coach.
All right. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Yes. And I mean, I guess I just wanted to say this is a really important thing to talk about. Eating disorders have increased significantly because of social media, and so appreciate the bipartisan work working to address the way social media has exacerbated this problem in our young people. I also just wonder, if this isn't included, we can talk about our health standards, which are also up for probably discussion soon, and the curriculums, and because I know in some districts students are required to take health courses, which includes learning about eating disorders and a whole host of other things. And so just wanted to offer that for the record.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Representative Lee. And Representative Keeler, did you have a question or comment on this one?
Yeah. Sorry. Yes.
Yes, Representative
Thank you.
Keeler.
I thought you had other testifiers.
No,
Sorry,
I
I
don't.
was just getting in line, and then it was my turn. Thank you for this bill. Thank you, Chair Pryor. I guess I have questions about the league too. So if you want to come on back down, before you sit down. I appreciate it as a college athlete myself and as a mom of athletes, and also understanding that this is not just a female or women's issue. We do really see it a lot in our boys. But I have two questions for you. So one is kind of to follow up with the coaches. Would this be designed only for head coaches, or would this be like all the way down to your freshmen, all the way down to like your third grade basketball programs? Like how far and what coaches would this cover?
Mr.
Madam
Anderson.
Chair, Representative Keeler, I think, first of all, we're the high school league, so we have the 12, 11, 10. We're looking at expanding into 9. We do have some 8th and 7th grade classes, but all of the coaches that are involved in those activities have to take the ongoing credits. It's a 3-year cycle. We do a lot of that online. We also do an annual requirement that every AD in Minnesota come to an in-person meeting with league staff to go over these issues as well.
Okay.
Follow-up, Representative Keeler.
Thank you, Chair. That's helpful. Good to know. Weird that it doesn't go to 9th grade, though, because isn't 9th grade kind of part of high school, or why is that different for the high school league?
Mr. Anderson.
Madam Chair, that's an excellent question because the high school league's doing this right now. We're just expanding into 9th grade.
Yeah.
High school has always been 10, 11, and 12, and that we had varsity and junior varsity sports, but we didn't govern 9th grade sports. And it's a policy and economic decision to make that expansion as we expand the insurances into those grades. If a 9th grade student was playing on the junior varsity, then they fall within the jurisdiction of the league. But if it's a 9th grade versus 9th grade, they have not in the past, so we're expanding into that.
Okay. Interesting discussion that, and note to all committee members' minds that this is something that we should be aware of. Representative Keeler?
Yep, very last question and more. I would like to follow up because I think I heard you say like you guys are looking for things to kind of add into your 3-year. Could maybe just briefly, I know you mentioned some things, but what are some of the trainings that coaches get in preventative education, like suicide prevention, heat stroke, understanding prevention? Like, what are some of those, and are there some areas that we can also add to this?
An understanding of that.
Madam Chair, and I would say, actually, we have a statutory structure already on concussion, and we have pretty aggressive rules and protocols and instruction on concussion. We have a program called Anyone Can Save a Life that has to deal with sudden cardiac death and the use of AEDs and the training on that. We get into different rules. Wrestling has rules, for example, about skin and those kind of pieces. We have a very extensive rule book in addition to the training pieces that we do. So it's a lot. I might say, and it's a good thing to share with the committee. Generally, the high school league isn't people's favorite group, but we do solve a lot of issues for you folks. We decide how long the seasons will be, and when the tournaments will be, and how many games kids can play, and how many innings they can pitch, and all of the level of discussion on this is pretty granular, and always with the idea of making this a good experience and a safe experience. You mentioned the heat exhaustion. We've got temperature rules, a very, very detailed set of rules and stuff. So we can talk about it some more. It's always a good topic, I think.
Great. Thank you. I think we'll move on then.
I just want to make sure we do follow up because I want to nerd out about it a little bit.
Sure.
With the sports.
You know where to find Mr. Anderson. And we, Representative Berg?
No, I just have a question, I guess. I had 2 high school wrestlers, and I feel like the whole culture around wrestling is one big eating disorder, because I would have kids at my house and they're, wrapped up in plastic trash bags because they're sweating out that last 3 ounces to make weight. And so I'm just wondering if we are in a situation where the school itself is creating this culture, how does that impact this legislation?
Thoughts, Representative Robbins?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question. Yes, I have heard anecdotes like that from a lot of people as I began working on this bill. And our testifier, Ms. Radzek, has, extensive examples as well. And I think that's why this is important, because we want to set a standard in the state through the high school league of what is healthy eating in all of these sports. And there are some sports maybe, where they encourage, carb loading or different things that's specific for their sport. but making sure it's based in science and based in research, and that we're encouraging athletes to understand the totality of healthy eating and healthy body weight. So to me, that's why this is important, because of examples like that where coaches, maybe that's how they were taught, or they come from different places. So it's sort of creating a standard through this coaching license that the high school league does in the ongoing training. I think it's going to be helpful for athletes in all sports.
Thank you. Thank you. Representative Bennett.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And thank you, Representative Robbins, for bringing this forward. I think it's a hugely important issue. And Rep. Keeler, you had some great questions about the league. I'd be interested in hearing those things, too. Just want to say thank you for not creating an additional mandate on our schools, finding a way to do this without doing that. Currently, our teachers and staff are really overwhelmed with all the new mandates, so we don't need any more. So thanks for that. Very quick question. Are there resources out there that the high school league can use already for best practice instruction? I'm assuming there are, but.
Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so certainly the testifiers group with all is a good resource, but the high school league and I have already had conversations, and they're going to be looking at national resources as well. And they are also planning, when they attend a national conference on this issue, to bring it forward and ask for what other schools and states are doing, but also bring forward our idea here in Minnesota as a consideration for other states to take a look at. So I think they have committed to finding those best resources, and I have great faith in the high school league and that they will do that. And to your point about the mandate, I have to say that was really important to me in bringing this bill. And the great relationship we've had in these discussions with the high school league, I'm very grateful for, because they've been strong partners in this, and the opportunity to bring it for the committee to your attention, I'm very grateful for, and also to raise the issue publicly. Our students and parents and coaches all need to understand what a huge issue this is, and that it's something we can make a difference on for kids.
Mm-hmm. And may I accept those as your closing words for this bill, and very well said. Thank you, Representative Robbins, for presenting this bill. And with that, Representative Mueller renews her motion to lay over House File 3660 for further consideration. Thank you. All right. In preparation for the next bill that we're going to hear from Representative Keeler, we're going to have a presentation from Department of Education. Ivy Wheeler, the director of Compass at MDE, Collaborative Minnesota Partnership to Advance Student Success. We know that, as a topic, absenteeism has been something that, we've talked about the history of the committee and what's been talked about. It's been a while since we've looked at absenteeism, how this is a part of our kind of accountability for schools. And so we wanted to get some more background and some information on that before we actually hear a specific bill addressing this issue. And so if you could, Ms. Wheeler, if you could please introduce yourself and begin with the presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Committee. My name is Ivy Wheeler. I'm the Director of Compass for the Minnesota Department of Education. First, I'd like to start by focusing on our 10 Minnesota commitments to equity, and especially highlighting prioritize equity, measure what matters, and improve conditions for learning. Next, I would like to start with some definitions that will be helpful to us as we go through this presentation. Consistent attendance means that the student has been in attendance for more than 90% of the school days in a school year. The inverse of that is chronic absenteeism, which means that the student has not been in attendance 10% or more of the school days in the school year, and this includes both excused and unexcused absences. Daily attendance is a definition that is determined at the local level. So what it means to be in school for a day is determined at the local level. Why is focusing on attendance so important? The United States Department of Education data story on the impact of chronic absenteeism explains that students who are chronically absent in early grades are less likely to read at grade level in third grade. Students who are not reading at grade level in third grade are much more likely to drop out of school before graduation. Students who drop out of school before graduation are more likely to experience poor outcomes later in life, such as poverty, diminished health, and involvement in the criminal justice system. Also, low consistent attendance, either for students or student groups, may indicate that those students and families do not feel connected to school as a result of climate issues, or that they're facing outside barriers that the school could help address. How are we currently tracking attendance data? We use MARS, which is the Minnesota Automated Reporting System, to collect and track attendance data. And the data that we get it in December for the previous school year. This data shows us the students at each school who were consistently in attendance or who were chronically absent, and it allows us to calculate the percent of students who were chronically absent at each school. This data does not differentiate between excused and unexcused absences, and this data can be disaggregated by race and ethnicity, ability status, socioeconomic status, and other student groups. As far as tracking students who are not currently enrolled in a school, because we use this MARS data for school finance, it is difficult to use it to track students who have been unenrolled due to missing 15 or more days consecutively in a way that helps us to inform interventions before that has happened and provide support needed. Now we're going to look at some data trends. The first graph that we see is looking at consistent attendance from 2018 to 2022, but notice that it skips over years 2020 and 2021. And what we see is that in 2018 and 2019, there was consistent attendance was not where we want to see it, but it was somewhat stable, and that by 2022, there was a 15% or more drop in most grade levels in consistent attendance. The next graph shows the inverse chronic absenteeism and the change that we saw from 2018 to 2022. What we see is that in some of these and most of these grade levels or grade bands, we actually saw chronic absenteeism double. And in the all levels, we did see it exactly double from 18 to 22. The final data slide shows chronic absenteeism disaggregated by student group only from the year 2022. Chronic absenteeism for all students in 2022 was 30.2%. And the gaps that we see in student groups show us that it's even higher, and that this is a gap that is greatly impacting some student groups more than others. You can see that for American Indian students, this chronic absenteeism was 55.7% in 2022. For Black and African American students, it was 40% in 2022. And for students eligible for free and reduced price lunch, 42.8%. And there are other student groups on the slide, but I was wanting to highlight a few of those. What have we been doing, and what can we do to support with addressing attendance and consistent attendance and chronic absenteeism? Historically, the Department of Education has primarily provided support to districts and schools for continuous improvement only in schools that were identified through our state accountability system, and primarily using funding from federal funding through ESSA. In that identification system, attendance is the final filter for identification. What that means is that no schools are identified for attendance alone. It's the final filter we use when we're deciding which schools to focus on. Identification attendance data is, again, based on the percent of students missing more than 10% of school days in a school year. These identified schools have received support by school advocates to build capacity of the school leadership teams to lead through continuous improvement. The school engages in comprehensive needs assessment and identifies an evidence-based practice, and then implements that evidence-based practice. One thing that that we can note is that the number of schools that selected an attendance-specific evidence-based practice in this current round of identification was 4 schools. That doesn't mean that other schools aren't working specifically on attendance, but they might be addressing it through more general climate and culture and engaging curriculum in other ways. Due to the legislation and resources from last year, thank you, we have been able to start building a new system, a new statewide system, in partnership with the Minnesota Service Cooperatives that will allow us to provide support for continuous improvement to all districts, all schools, all charter schools, all tribal schools. We will be able to support them with positions including Minnesota MTSS, literacy, math, principal support, climate and culture, with a focus on equitable access for specific student groups. We will be able to provide district-level implementation of the Minnesota MTSS framework, which we'll be coming back to in more detail, through cohorts, regional professional development, direct support, and local capacity building. We'll be able to provide support with foundational supports and Tier 1 practices for school climate and culture, and an additional layer of focused support for schools identified through the accountability system will continue. What we will not be addressing through this current new system is that we will not have an attendance specialist at MDE to follow statewide national trends and promising practices. We won't have specific district-level attendance policy support, and we won't have the regional support that gets into specific attendance Tier 2 and Tier 3 practices, which we'll talk about a little bit further in the presentation. I also wanted to highlight some other areas of support and guidance that MDE does provide. We have the Minnesota Early Indicator Response System, MERS 2.0, which is an early warning and intervention system that where we support districts to use their own data to identify early warning signs and intervene for students. We have full service community schools model, and we have the Minnesota Family and Community Engagement model. So what is working? What promising practices and interventions and guidance do we see nationally? We see that what is working is research-based guidance from the state agency with aligned professional development, flexible support, and capacity building, solutions that are based on local strengths, contexts, and needs, and systemic solutions that increase school connectedness and belonging and identify and remove student group or specific student barriers to attendance. And we are seeing multi-tiered systems of support as those systemic solutions, which we are going to talk a little bit more about. On this slide, we see the Minnesota MTSS framework, which is a framework for measuring and implementing a multi-tiered system of support. What you see here are the 5 components of Minnesota MTSS. We have infrastructure for continuous improvement, where we look to make sure that the system itself is ready to implement appropriate practices and interventions and supports as needed. Meaningful family and community engagement to make sure that we are hearing from families and actually partnering with them around leadership decisions and systemic decisions. Skipping down to assessment, how are we using not only test score data, but also survey data from students and families about connectedness to school and barriers that they're facing in decision making, and that leads into database decision making. How are we at the state level and also supporting at the local level to use their data to make decisions about their systems and their students and the supports that are needed? What you see on the triangle, if you look at our little triangle in the Minnesota MTSS graphic, multi-layered practices and supports, and then you look over to the side, this is an example of what multi-layered practices and supports can look like specifically to address attendance concerns. Those multi-layered practices and supports could also be about high-quality instruction and other layers of academic supports. Here we're looking at attendance. So this triangle shows that at the bottom are the foundational supports to promote conditions of learning, Tier 1 universal supports, Tier 2 and Tier 3. And we're going to look just on the next 2 slides. I'm going to put them up just briefly and comment on one example of each of those tiers of support. So for example, foundational supports would be belonging and connection to school. Universal supports could be routines and rituals and clear and consistent communication. Tier 2 supports could look like check-in, connect, family visits. Tier 3 interventions, housing stability supports, And the reason that it's so important to address absenteeism and ensuring that students are connected to school and removing barriers as a system through Minnesota MTSS and layered supports is because by the time we get to those tier 2 and tier 3 supports, they do require a lot of time and resources. So we want to make sure that we're first looking at the entire system and we're ensuring that we have addressed climate and culture and that we have rigorous and engaging academics and that we have that sense of belonging so that we can then start to look at individual student groups and why that system is not working and what we need to change about it, and then individual students and what supports they might need. What are we hearing and seeing as we begin implementing this new statewide system of support? MDE currently has the data needed to identify schools for additional support through the state accountability system and to identify world's best workforce identified schools with the highest % of identified schools and to identify other tiers of support for districts and schools through the Compass statewide system of support. So we can use the data that we have to see where we need to focus our support. Districts and partners are sharing that additional ways of collecting and reporting and using data to guide decision-making and target support could be beneficial if it is a robust and well-maintained system that tracks attendance and absenteeism in real time and has the capacity to track the implementation and impact of evidence-based practices as we're implementing them. And districts and partners are also sharing that it would be beneficial for MDE to build the capacity of and support district and school leaders to use their local data to track attendance in real time and identify early warning signs and barriers and to improve systems and support the unique strengths of their families and their communities at the local level.
Thank you. And I think what we'll do at this time is, even if we won't take questions on the presentation, but we'll thank you for joining us today. And we'll start in on our bill on absenteeism. But members know that if there's more information that you need, that we know somebody to talk to and where to field those questions. And if you're able to stay on, if anything comes up during the discussion, we'd appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right. And with that, we'll call Representative Keeler forward and House File 3827. And members, it is our intention to re-refer House File 3827 to Education Finance Committee to look at any costs that might be associated with this this endeavor that the bill proposes. So Representative Keeler, we will motion, if you would like to motion House File 3827 before the committee.
Yes, Madam Chair, that's my motion.
Thank you, Representative Keeler. All right, well, please present your bill.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. So I go back to my time in grad school when I was doing my practicum. And the number one thing I did, I went out into the communities and asked my community what were the barriers to academic success outside of academic rigor. So I wasn't asking them if math's hard or English, because we have a lot of tests that will tell us how our students do academically. The three things that rose to the top when I did that in my community was the number one thing was lack of representation. I know the stats from my districts. I'm not totally sure about yours, but 99% of my teachers are white, yet we speak over 42 different languages, and almost 60% of our student population identifies as 2 or more races or a non-white background. And so some of our students were saying, school just doesn't feel right because I don't see people who look like me. The other 2 components were lack of housing and food insecurities, and some of you may know I addressed that in many other areas. And so when we got the report on attendance, my school did very well, which led me to go back to my school district and talk to my kids, and my administrators and Chair Pryor came to some of those meetings with me. And my school still thinks that they're not great at attendance, even though we're better than maybe the rest of the state. And so we started to dig in. And in my history in the school districts, I've worked in a lot of unique roles that a lot of people don't necessarily love, including I was the front desk staff at an elementary school. So my number one job was to hand out the tardy slips when they came. Like, we're so glad you're here. Like, do you know where you're supposed to go? Who's your teacher? Right? Like, those conversations. And then I moved to the special education place, was doing a lot with IEPs and noticed kids were missing school for a lot of medical appointments and such. Moved over to be a substitute coordinator, which is blessings to their own hearts, right? That's a really hard job because we don't have a lot of substitutes. And then the last one was I was an Indian education liaison. So in all of those roles, I dealt really significantly with students missing school and the reasons why. And so what this bill does is it tracks what really matters. I think one of the things we said is that we measure what matters. And I'm big on collecting data before we just try to find solutions. And so what this bill does is it adds a couple things. One, it breaks down more than just that 90% number. So it's 16 and a half days is where we stand if you've missed more than 10% of a school year. Well, we have some kids that miss more than 50%. And I don't know about you guys in your districts. You guys are teachers and administrators that 16 and a half days is a really low cutoff. We have some kids that are chronically missing 50% or more. And so the one thing in this bill that I would like to keep intact is that we add those 3 tiers now. So we know more than just if students are missing that 10% or more, we actually break it down to say, okay, tell us what the 10% or more count is, but then also tell us who's fitting between the 10 and 29%, 30 to 49%, and 50 and above, and break those down to elementary, middle school, high school. Because I don't know if any of you guys have elementary students or high school students. They miss school for very different reasons. My kindergartner maybe just doesn't want to get up, or that's maybe more of a parent or household function, where my senior, he drives and it's his choice whether or not he wants to show up. And so I just think collecting data in a more broken down way will actually help us learn what it is our students are missing school for. And then there is a suggestion that we start adding mental health. So right now, if you look at when you have your drop downs, often it just says health reasons. So you don't know the difference between if one of my athletes broke their foot and they went in for a surgery versus a student who's really having chronic anxiety or mental health concerns. And so to me, as we start to build these narratives, like we need more counselors, we need more support staff, I think a bill like this will just help us collect the data that we need to really know by grade and the severity. The last thing that I'll mention, and then we can go to testifiers, is that the reason that we put in here the 50% or more, I know that we don't want to touch seat time, and I don't even want to get started in that conversation. But I do think that at some point, if we start to collect data, if a student every year misses more than 50%, at what point are they we need to have conversations about academically continuing to move them on? I know that there's a social component to it, but at this point, we're not even really collecting that data. So this is a work in progress. I feel like this is the only time I'm ever going to quote Ryan Winkler. But if you want to fix an issue, write a bill, right? And then people will start to come. And so I do want to say in this space, this is a work in progress. We've had organizers and stakeholders really share some good solutions and suggestions. So I do want to be clear that we're very open to craft a wonderful bill here. So we can move to testifiers.
And we will move to testimony, and we do have a number of remote testifiers. And we'll begin with Tanya Drown, Senior Organized National Parents Union. And if you can unmute and identify yourself and begin with your testimony.
Hello, my name is Tonya Drawn. So greetings, respected committee members. My name is Tonya Drawn, and today I stand before you not just as a community advocate, but as a grandmother who has spent a lifetime championing the welfare of our children. My concerns center around the current approach to addressing student absence, particularly the trend of criminalization that we see unfolding. I believe it is time for a shift, and I urge you to consider trauma-informed approaches to keep our kids in school. As a mother and a grandmother, I've seen the challenges faced by our youth evolve over the years. It is disheartening to witness the increasing number of students being pushed towards the school-to-prison pipeline due to chronic absenteeism. We cannot ignore the fact that many of these absences stem from traumatic experiences, be it in the home, the community, or the school itself. Our children need more than just an education. They need environments that foster healing, understanding, and inclusion. Instead of restoring to punitive measures, let us embrace trauma-informed approaches that recognize the underlying issues of contributing to absenteeism. By doing so, we can create spaces that address the root causes of these challenges and provide the necessary support for our children to thrive. Trauma-informed classroom prioritize empathy, recognize that every student carries their own burdens and struggles. These classrooms encourage engagement, inclusivity, and understanding, creating an atmosphere where students feel safe and supported. It is my firm belief that by adopting such approaches, we can break the cycle of absenteeism and prevent the unnecessary criminalization of our youth. Investing in mental health sources, social workers, and training educators in trauma-informed practices will yield better outcomes. It is time we move away from punitive measures that only serve to alienate our youth and instead focus on building bridges of compassion and support. I implore this committee to champion the cause of trauma-informed education, creating an environment where students are not just seen as attendants, but as individuals with unique needs and experiences. Let us pave the way for our classrooms that nurture resilience, understanding, allowing our children to overcome their challenges and thrive. Thank you for your time, and I trust together we can build a bigger, brighter future for our community's children.
Thank you for your testimony. Next up is Jackie Thomas, parent from Roseville. Please unmute, identify yourself, and proceed. Jackie Thomas.
Yes. Good. Oh, I'm not showing real good here. Sorry. Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Jacqueline Thomas. I am a parent, an advocate, and also a licensed parent educator. And with all of that, I have a child that's gone through the school system, and children being penalized and criminalized for attendance, it doesn't help the family. You're continuing to traumatize and torment the families. We need to create an atmosphere and an environment in schools that will welcome the families, that will welcome the children. Criminalizing them does nothing positive. We need research-based practices that retain children in school to get an education, which in turn helps to retain schools to stay open, to continue to provide education that helps communities and our state. When we criminalize families, we're not just criminalizing that family, we're criminalizing our communities. We're criminalizing everything that exists. Without our children getting an education and being able to stay in school and change the practices of how they need to stay in school and how they can stay in school, it does nothing positive to help everything further and everything just grow. I really urge the community to think about changing the way the practices are now and looking at something that's positive that will also be research-based and trauma-informed for our families and our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, I have Maria Purdy, a parent from Minneapolis. If you can hear me, and please unmute and identify yourself.
Hi, my name is Maria Perry. Members of committee, my name is Maria Perry, and I stand before you today as a concerned mother, deeply engaged in the welfare of our community, most vulnerable children. As a mom working within the realms of juvenile detention, foster care, and with the homeless youth, I cannot stay silent on a matter that is gravely and greatly affecting the lives of our children, particularly those who already are facing immense challenges. I am here to express the profound concerns about the dangers associated with criminalizing absenteeism, a practice that not only perpetuates the school to prison pipelines, but exacerbates the hardship faced by families already going through numerous adversities. I have witnessed this firsthand. The detrimental impact this approach has for our children. Our children need support, understanding, and resources, not the heavy hand of systems that seem more included or more inclined to punish more inclined to punish than to uplift. By criminalizing absentees and absent students, we are punishing these young minds into cycles that lead directly from school to juvenile detention centers and to foster care systems and to other systems that shouldn't have our children. This not only stifles their potential, but contributes to the perpetuation of destructive narrative that disproportionately affects Black and Brown communities. When children miss school, it's often symptoms of deeper issues, poverty, lack of access resources, struggling with mental health. Rather than addressing these rooted causes, we are aggravating our problems by involving children in child protection services and further traumatizing our youth. Families who are already navigating complexities of life and being criminalized, adding additional layers of hardship to their families' already burdensome existence. And those are things that we shouldn't do. Imagine a child who is already going through foster care, who's already going through hard times. We've had murders in our cities. We have other abuse and other trauma-related issues, and our kids are impacted by that. So imagine being a kid that is coming to school, that is expecting and seeking a solace, only to meet the punishment and threat of legal punishment. The trauma inflicted upon our youth and our young minds is immeasurable and only serves a perpetuated cycle of despair. I implore this committee to consider an alternative approach, one that prioritizes empathy, support, and rehabilitation over punishment and measurement. Investing in social workers, mental health services, and community outreach programs will prove far more beneficial in addressing the underlying issues contributing to our absent and tardy students. Let us work together to break the chain and the barriers to school prison pipeline and create the environment that nurtures and potentially holds our children in regards to the circumstances. In conclusion, let us advocate the change and be the system to uplift rather than condemn. We have children that are hurting today that needs more of a trauma and loving response versus criminalizing our families. Our families are already impacted by so far much more than we're naming here today. And today I'm asking if we can get on the side of love versus the side of criminalization. We need to end criminalization in our schools and uplift our children and give them what they need. They don't need further harm added to their homes. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I have here in person Jim Dabney, Executive Director of the Minnesota Alliance with Youth, and then next up would be Matt Schaefer, Policy Director for Ed Allies. Mr. Dabney.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members. Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here today. My name is Jim Dabney. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Alliance with Youth. The Alliance is one of only 2 programs in the state of Minnesota identified by the National Partnership for Student Success as an evidence-based program sharing their goal of all students thriving. The Alliance recently issued a report, Chronic Absenteeism, a National and Local Challenge, that members will find in your packets. I want to thank Ms. Wheeler from the department for her presentation that reinforces much of the same data that we used in developing our report and our recommendations. We use statewide data from the Federal Department of Education that indicates a dramatic rise in the percentage of Minnesota schools with high or extreme chronic absenteeism, rising from 34% of schools in 2017-18 school year to a staggering 71% during the 2021-22 school year. This, to be clear, is a statewide issue. St. Louis County Schools posted a 36% chronic absenteeism rate. Brainerd, 29%, Stillwater, 26%, Eastern Carver County, 23%, Staples-Motley, 45%, Minneapolis, 58%, St. Paul, 57%. Our report also delves into the multiple factors that have been touched on here contributing to chronic absenteeism, ranging from family issues to health concerns to academic struggles. We at the Alliance believe in solutions. In the report, we provide examples of solutions already being implemented by some schools and community groups around the state, including increased family engagement initiatives, early warning systems, and mentorship programs to enhance student engagement and reduce absenteeism. Improving Minnesota's data system, as Representative Keeler does here in House File 3827, is important in bringing the needed light on this issue in the more granular level that's important for action. But I would remind members that Minnesota has a tradition of being data-rich and action-poor. Let's look not just at the data, but at solutions that work for students, schools, and families. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Keeler, for your leadership on this issue.
Thank you. And we have Mr. Matt Schaefer up next, and then Roger Arneson after that, if you can be ready. Please identify yourself and proceed.
Chair Pryor, members of the committee, good afternoon again. Matt Schaefer, Policy Director at Ed Allies. I'm here today to testify in support of House File 3827. I want to thank Representative Keeler for her leadership in taking on this massive and multifaceted issue. And thank you to Chair Pryor for giving ample committee time to this topic. Chair Pryor, you said in a meeting earlier this year that you were going to make addressing chronic absenteeism a priority, and you followed through on that commitment. And I thank you for that. This is a big deal, and it's heartening to see the House lead on it. There's already been a lot of talk of absenteeism statistics, but I want to add just a couple more data points to the conversation. So Minnesota's chronic absenteeism rate is 30%. That 30% represents 236,100 children. Those 236,100 children would fill every seat in US Bank Stadium, TCF Bank Stadium, Target Field, Target Center, Allianz Field, XL Energy Center, Williams Arena, the Guthrie, Orchestra Hall, and the Ordway. They missed at least 3.8 million days of school and at least 19 million hours of instruction in one school year. These are almost certainly underestimates because the chronic absenteeism designation is an imperfect measure. All we know is students either miss less than 10% of the school year or more than 10% of the school year. And it's why House File 3827 is much needed to provide more nuance and context to the data. There are bright spots. Districts like St. Cloud, Worthington, Robbinsdale, and Moorhead are all beating the state averages for all student groups when it comes to consistent attendance. We should be learning from and lifting up their efforts and successes to help scale solutions. What we have now is incomplete and unwieldy data, but still evidence of a system-wide issue. And even before the pandemic, our disaggregated rates of chronic absenteeism were stark and unacceptable. Shifting quickly to another part of the bill, to the principal evaluation piece, it's something new and it's something different. Looking at what principals are already required by statute to be evaluated on, student career and college readiness, student academic growth, and school culture would all be boosted by improving student attendance. It almost goes without saying, but getting kids in school consistently is a foundational component of whether or not that school is meeting its mission and purpose. Adding attendance into the mix of areas a principal is evaluated on will help elevate this issue appropriately. Rep. Keeler's bill is a firm but not final step in the right direction. I want to thank you for your leadership, Representative Keeler. Thank you all for your time today. Again.
All right, Mr. Arneson, if you can come forward. And as we settle in, I do appreciate the committee's endurance today, that we have gone past our time, but that was pretty much planned. And also, we do have one final bill on testifiers that are here today, and we appreciate that you are able to wait and be with us, and we will hear your bill. Thank you. All right, Mr. Arneson.
Madam Chair and members, I'm Roger Arneson. I represent the Elementary and the Secondary Principals Association, and also today I'm testifying on behalf of the School Board Association, MASA, and AMSD, as you know how we kind of do that with the alphabet stuff here a little bit. And I want to say at the outset, I thought the department's presentation, the initial comments by Representative Keeler, these are all goals that we all agree on. There is no magic bullet when it comes to attendance. This is something that all schools have struggled with. There's a broad category of reasons that kids don't come. I would say there's also a broad category of reasons why they do come. There's a magic to all of this, and the things that we can do with what the department discussed as well, those types of initiatives I think are going to be real helpful. A couple things about the bill, and we'll work with Representative Keeler on this as it goes forward. On the front end of the bill, if you notice, it says that the school liaison officer, counselor, social worker, or other student personnel can intake the absences. We think it would be better if we said it would be the principal or the principal's designee, just to clear that up. Another piece here, and this says that the parent, and the statute has always been set up that the parent makes an application to have an excuse from school. This says that the prior statute says the school may ask for that in writing. This would require that in writing. We have a lot of this that is done over the telephone. We think that there are some other issues requiring that in writing, and we'd encourage you to take that particular requirement out just to give schools a lot of discretion on that as they're working through the telephone piece on that. A couple other technical pieces just to look at. The addition into the principals evaluation. And if you notice, the bill talks about the excused absences pieces, and then principal evaluation as well as teacher evaluation is actually included in the Teacher Tenure Act. And that's where this long section here that's on page 3, there's a new line on 3.26 that talks about the evaluation and an idea of absenteeism in addressing the causes. I think we need to work on that. If you look at 7, that talks about, and it says the evaluation must use longitudinal data as 35% of the evaluation, incorporate district achievement goals. 8 says use longitudinal data and identify the efforts to address the causes of absenteeism. I'm not sure if it meant to say use longitudinal data to identify what those activities are, but we should talk about that for purposes of discussing that. There's a lot of data that's going to be picked up here, and I think maybe we can talk about, maybe we can narrow some of that. Maybe we can do some pilot pieces to get the type of data that we need to try to design the type of programs that are going to address the issues that you're talking about. There is an idea in this, that this is going to be reported annually. Does it have the type of flexibility that we want to have? I think that was discussed in the department's presentation as well, and that's something we want to talk about. As you can see, these are more technical concerns. They're things that we think we can work with you about. One of the things that I have asked a couple of the colleagues, and that's on 5.4 on page 5. It says that the data is supposed to be reported to the commissioner in the aggregate and disaggregated. And we were kind of wondering if we were supposed to do that, or does the department do that? And then the other piece is when we do that aggregation, it talks about that there's a grade band of K through 5, 6 through 8, 9 through 12. We probably need some flexibility on that, given that not all of the schools are organized in that particular fashion. And so just some things to talk about. We look forward to talking, with the staff and with Representative Keeler about that. So thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Keeler.
Appreciate your comments. We have no more presenters, and we will turn to member discussion. Representative Berg, you should be first.
Thank you, Representative Keeler. This is, as the testifiers talked about, school attendance is really, really difficult and very nuanced. So why kids come, why they don't come, it's a very, very nuanced conversation. So I love the idea of collecting data and would love to just really be able to drill down so that I can look at, why is a kid coming? Because as the department went through and they talked about unexcused and excused absences, so Ed Allies did this really nice chart. I would just point out that my chart, there's only one category that Jordan is not doing well in, and it's just 1 percentage point. So, so great job to my colleagues. We'll leave it at that. But and it's so. But when we have an excused and unexcused absence all piled into the same thing, there's a very, very practical difference between why a kid is excused and why they're unexcused. And so I think that's something that we really want to be able to look at. The department also talked about a 15-day drop, and I actually have a bill to address that. So I think we can talk about that. Is a significant issue, especially post-pandemic. We have kids that have just frankly disappeared, and we don't know where they're at. We've had multiple experiences in just my district where students are dropped and we don't know where they're at. And we're trying to figure that out. If they're in our community, that's pretty easy, because in a school system, you don't just drop a kid at 15 days. Like, you're going out, you've done that, you're knocking on doors, literally there are times that I've gone with parents and pulled the kid out of bed. And so that 15-day drop, it's a funding statute, but we're required to drop the kid, but then also in that statute, we're still required to try to figure out where that kid is. So I think that's a simple piece we could address. I love how you talked about social promotion and where does that fit? If a kid is gone 50% of the time, do they really did they really learn anything? And then we wonder why our academic data is the way it is. So I think, and I just, some of the testifiers talked about some really hard things, about the criminalization, about punitive measures. I think we have to just recognize that schools are doing everything that they can do prior to even broaching any type of punitive measure to do that. There are ongoing relationships built with families. I would guess that's probably the foundational component of what Moorhead is doing. And one of the things that we talk a lot about in not only my school district, but just our area is we talk about 4 R's, and I think I've addressed this. It's relevance, results, rigor, and relationships. And we automatically think that, well, if we have a good relationship with kids, they're going to show up. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Kids will show up if it's relevant to what they're doing. Do they find relevance in the education? So I look forward to working with you. I've got a lot of thoughts. I'll be respectful of time. But I think we have to have the mindset that our educators are doing everything that they can do. We're not wanting to go down a punitive path. So when we talk like that, frankly, it's difficult to hear as an educator because that's not where people's hearts are. I've got to address the principal thing. I love that as long as we maybe have some incentive pay built in for building principals when they grow that. So I'll leave it with that.
I'm going to go to Representative Hill and then to Representative Bennett, if that's all right with the discussion, because I know that we have a hard stop on this one. So Representative Hill.
Thank you, Chair Pryor, and thank you, Representative Keeler, for bringing this bill. I think that what stuck out to me while we were listening to the powerful testimony on this bill was how related this issue is to some of the other matters that we've been hearing about, even here today in this committee hearing. When it comes to support personnel, when it comes to school counselors who have the relationships built with the students, who can really dig in to some of the factors that might be impacting attendance, we need to make sure that we have people in those roles and in those seats. And so I really appreciate the approach of Rep. Keeler being open to working with all stakeholders, just as Representative Berg was previously in the hearing. And I look forward to moving this work forward so that we can address this situation head on.
Thank you, Representative Hill. Representative Bennett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a question for Rep. Keeler, but just a quick question. Why is this bill going to Ed Fi? I don't see a finance component.
There was a question on whether or not this might need some financial aspects to it. And we thought that if we send it to Ed Finance, they can have it worked out by then.
Thank you. If I might ask my question, thank you.
Yes.
And Representative Keeler, thank you. Attendance is so important, and I believe collecting data is that beginning point because we need to know where the problem lies. It's like a medical evaluation. You can't just prescribe something if you don't know what the issue is. So thank you for this. I do have a question just and practically how this works as a former elementary school teacher. I would inevitably have at least one student a year who would be chronically tardy and anywhere from a half hour to an hour and a half late in the morning, and they'd miss reading class because that's what we taught right away and typically. So how does this work elementary? Because it says absent means not in attendance for a class or a school day. In elementary, we don't really have classes per se. So is there an amount of time where it moves from tardy to absent at the elementary level, or how does that work in classifying this elementary-wise? Because I do think we need to take into account kind of the number of minutes or hours missed. Does this pull that in?
Representative Keeler.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Representative Bennett. Can you tell me what line you see that on?
4.7 is just in the definition area. Attendance means not in attendance for a class or a school day. So in elementary, I'm just curious how that might work since we don't have classes per se.
Representative Keeler.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Representative. I mean, I think this So the one thing that we're not addressing, because this bill originally had a bunch of things we were going to address, right? But going back to understand that every district collects information differently. So we're not trying to touch the interventions. We're leaving those very local for whatever your community or your school district feels like works for them. And also, we're not diving into how you do your attendance at this point. What we're assuming is that you'll just continue to do attendance like you do, because we hear that a lot, that a first grader can show up at 11:55 and it's like marked the whole morning, where
Right.
like my high schooler goes in for an hour and a half block and then a second block. So we can look at that a little bit more. I don't know if Mars, do you guys oversee the Mars coordinating reports? Is this a question you guys can help answer?
Great. So
We can
this-
take that
take it
offline. That's okay.
offline
I think
and
it's a good
pursue it.
thing to figure out. I don't want to add any additional burdens onto our districts and how they're collecting the data. But I think it is something, a further discussion for that, how it affects elementary. Thanks.
I agree.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, and we will take that offline and definitely dig into what that means and what the implications are. Now we're ready for closing remarks. Representative Keeler.
Thank you, Chair Pryor and members, for listening to this. This is a really, really big task. Often when we go around the room and it's like, tell us what your favorite experiences in school, many of you have multiple experiences that are wonderful. I've mentioned it here before, and with a lot of the people I've worked with, school is not the most fun place for some of us to go. And my goal genuinely is to make school fun, safe, and inclusive for every student in Minnesota. And I think like my Angelo, I always love my Angelo, but when we know better, we do better. And so that's why we've pared this down quite a bit, to just be collecting the data in the format that schools already collect the data, just so that we can break it down a little bit more. And again, my last closing note is that this is a work in progress. This is a massive issue. So if people have solution-focused ideas, please, my door is open. Welcome to have those conversations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Representative Keeler. And with that, Representative Keeler renews her motion to re-refer House File 3827 to the Education Finance Committee. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, the motion carries, and House File 3827, it's on its way. Thank you, Representative Keeler. All right, thank you. We have one more bill. Well, we have a vehicle bill that we can get off, but we're going now to House File 3780. Thank you so much, Representative Hicks, and those that are with her today to testify. This was such an important effort that was then work that's been done in the interim for this bill, and we are grateful that you are able to present it today. It is our intention to re-refer this to Education Finance, and that we will be able to do that this afternoon. So let's see, we need to move this before the committee. Representative Feist, would you like to motion House File 3780 before the committee to re-refer it to Education Finance?
I would. So moved, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Feist. So we have the bill in front of us. Representative Hicks.
We do have an amendment.
And you do have the amendment. And Representative Feist, would you also please move the A1 amendment to be before us?
So moved.
All right. So the A1 amendment is the author's amendment. Would you like to talk about it as the bill as a whole or as the amendment separately?
We can talk about the bill as a whole. The amendment really is just listening to all the folks involved and really making sure that we're hearing all the different perspectives. So we just continue to have that conversation.
All right. Thank you, Representative Hicks. So we will take a vote on the A1 amendment. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. We have the bill before us as amended. Representative Hicks.
Thank you so much, committee and Chair Pryor. I just want to start by really thanking everyone who has helped move this bill forward. This has been a true collaboration from the beginning, and I'm so grateful for all of the organizations that volunteered their time and work to get us to this place today. High-quality special education is vital for our students with disabilities to succeed and live their best lives while in school and beyond. To provide high-quality services, we must work together to ensure that any policy changes we make in special education are student and family-centered, but also work for our educators, our schools, and our communities. This commitment is what has led to the bill in front of you today. This bill is the first step in working to create a system that's working better for our students, our parents, our teachers, our districts, and others. Today, we are looking at a bill that decreases paperwork around date services and works with the department to help ensure that they are able to work with all of the stakeholders in this space to examine how we can improve special education funding formula to ensure that we're incentivizing and rewarding inclusion and student-focused services. With that, Chair, I would like to turn it over to my testifiers.
Thank you, Representative Hicks. So we have in-person testifiers. Thank you so much for being with us today. First up, I have Maren Hoffer, and after that, it'll be Dr. Justin Killian, if you can be ready. Maren Hoffer, Executive Director, Multicultural Autism Action Network, MAAN. If you can introduce yourself for the committee and begin your testimony.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you so much, committee members, for hearing from me today. My name is Maren Christensen Hofer. I'm the Executive Director for the Multicultural Autism Action Network. I also serve on the Board of Directors for the ARC of Minnesota, and I serve as a member of the Coalition for Children with Disabilities. And perhaps most importantly, I'm also mom to an amazing kiddo with a disability. And I really appreciate Representative Hicks' leadership on this issue. She has done more to bring a group of stakeholders together and really advance discussions about how to make things a little bit more efficient in the special education world, more so than has happened in the last decade. So we are very, very grateful for that. We're really excited to have this conversation about special education funding, and we see so many amazing things happening in our school and districts. Doing an incredible job with scarce resources. But quite frankly, we are also spending an awful lot of money on things that simply do not work. We are spending a lot of money on exclusionary practices. We're spending a lot of money on segregating students with disabilities. And that segregation is really expensive. It costs a lot of money, and it is not an evidence-based practice. And we need to take a moment to pause and really think about what the outcomes are for our students with disabilities. We've all seen, the statistics on what percentage of our students are meeting minimum standards, but we don't hear the story about what that looks like for kids with disabilities very often, and it's pretty troubling. We know that only roughly half of our students are performing in math and reading and science at standard levels. Well, for students with disabilities, that drops to around 25%, only 1 in 4. And if we look at students with intersecting identities, students that are both African American and a student with a disability, that drops to around 12 to 15%. And I don't know about you, but that keeps me awake at night. We really need to do better by these students. One of the other things that we really want to look at here is our segregated settings. Roughly 38% of our students in Minnesota are students of color, but over 50% of the students in our most segregated settings are students of color. Why is it that we are disproportionately putting students of color in our most restrictive settings? Again, I'm really grateful to Representative Hicks for her leadership on this. We've had some great discussions, and we see this as kind of a starting point to advance this conversation. We're really grateful for the conversation about paperwork and making things more efficient, because we know that we have very scarce resources, and we need to use them efficiently, and we need to make sure that those conversations also focus on best outcomes for our students. So thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Dr. Justin Killian, and after that, it will be Nicole Mueller, if you can be ready.
Thank you, Chair Pryor, members of the committee, Representative Hicks. My name is Justin Killian, and I'm here on behalf of the members of Education Minnesota to speak in favor of House File 3780, especially the provision that allows a standalone evaluation for developmental adapted physical education, also known as DAPE. One of the best parts of my job is I get to spend a lot of it working with special education teachers and special education paras. And I've been doing this a long time, and I've talked to you for a long time, and my members have talked to you for a long time, and there's two things we know to be true. Number one, Minnesota has a lot more requirements than the federal government requires for special education paperwork. And number two, it's the biggest stressor on our special education teachers. Paperwork burdens are a big deal, and I work with a veteran teacher a lot, and she recently told me that this year alone, she has spent 15 to 20 hours every weekend. She's taken one weekend off since the holiday break doing paperwork, and she spends 10 hours a day doing work around her classroom. So you can do the math there, and she's just one example of how this is playing out on the ground. So every session we have some new attempt to try to improve paperwork and make this a little easy for educators and families. And we believe that paperwork is very important. It's the contract for families to know their kids are getting services. It's their window into what's going on at school. But if we're not doing it efficiently and we're not broadening that window, then all we're doing is creating work for overworked educators. We hosted a coalition meeting at Education Minnesota in December, and we invited the following groups that all came willingly: MACE, MASA, the Minnesota Council of Exceptional Children, PACER, Minnesota Disability Law, us, Coalition for Children with Disabilities, and we even invited SPED Forms, and MDE came as well. Representative Hicks was at that gathering, and this bill came out of that original meeting. And this may seem like just a small technical fix to many of you, but for my members, it is huge. It is big, and it will really, really change their life. And if this happened, this would really boost their morale. Special education paperwork costs the state of Minnesota a lot of money as well. And so anything that we can do to reduce this burden we're putting on our educators is a step in the right direction. So I really, really want to thank you so much for bringing this forward. Our members are very excited and hope this bill keeps moving. It'll help reduce stress, and we hope it's just one small step towards a lot of future conversations about all the other ways we can improve special education paperwork in the state of Minnesota. But I cannot thank you enough.
Thank you. All right, next up, Nicole Mueller, and then after that, it'll be Melissa Stanky. Please introduce yourself and identify your organization.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Nicole Miller, and I am the Secondary Special Education Director at Rochester Public Schools. I'd like to speak today on behalf of the House File 3780 and the reduction of special education paperwork, specifically with developmental adaptive physical education. At Rochester Public Schools, we conduct approximately 1,320 comprehensive special education evaluations a year. This is to determine if a student qualifies for an educational disability or still has a continuing need. We also conduct 335 developmental adaptive physical education evaluations per year, which means approximately 25% of our special education evaluations will a year include DAPE. The House File 3780 will allow school districts to no longer require that comprehensive evaluation. To give an example, a comprehensive evaluation can consist of 15 to 25 pages of information within the report, while a standalone evaluation may only consist of approximately 5 pages of information of the necessary information to qualify. Previously, an amendment was passed to allow school districts to conduct a functional behavioral assessment as a standalone evaluation as well. This has greatly helped the paperwork reduction. So also providing the ability to complete a standalone DAPE evaluation will greatly reduce many staff members' paperwork. For example, this would include school psychologists, special education teachers, general education teachers, parents, and in this bill specifically, the DAPE teacher. The ultimate goal and the outcome will also be able to get student services in a more timely fashion without any barriers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. All right. Melissa Stank, please identify yourself, your organization.
Yes,
proceed.
thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Melissa Stanky. I'm the Director of Special Education for birth through 5th grade for Rochester Public Schools. So I am here today in support of House File 3780 to support a standalone DAPE, developmental adapted physical education evaluation. And we've talked a lot today about special education and our teacher shortage. And part of the fun part of my job is being able to talk to teachers and find out why they came into the field. But not one person says, I did this for the paperwork. I love the paperwork. So we really are working with people that have a passion for working with students, and they want to be able to do the best work that they can while also having accurate paperwork to be able to support and to promise those services that we will give for students. I have a story about early childhood special education, which is part of my continuum of what I support. And we have Part C services, which means that we support infants and toddlers with disabilities. And many times as they qualify for Part B or preschool age services that last up until their 22nd birthday, we think, what do they need in order to come to school? So we create the very best evaluation report that we can. And we provide those services. And then they come to school, they're all excited, they get to school and they start playing in the gym and on the playground with their peers. And their very smart teachers recognize that some of them might need to be taught differently how to use those motor abilities. They might need a different way to be instructed, and that's what DAPE is, developmental, appropriate, adapted physical education. This bill, or this House file, would allow us to be able to just look at that, as my colleague Nicole stated. It would save that additional paperwork. Last year alone in Rochester Public Schools, just in early childhood special education, one teacher completed 70 evaluations for DAPE. That's a lot of paperwork. So we ask that you consider the reduction and to allow us to do that standalone evaluation while still continuing to serve students the best that we can in these special classes, these special DAPE classes. And that is our ask today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we have no more testifiers on the list, and we'll turn to member discussion. Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Chair Pryor. Thank you, Representative Hicks. I was not a special ed teacher, but I was a teacher for a long time and saw whenever I would go and talk to my special ed teachers, they were always busy doing things like this. And so I appreciate, even if it looks like a small change, I know it's a big change. I know it's a big deal. And so I really appreciate this. I did have a question about Section 2, which is the commissioner's responsibility here with this. You know, I know it's only my second term, and I know some of you have been here way longer than I have, but the complaint of paperwork is not new, and the ideas of streamlining paperwork are not new. All of those things have been brought up for years and years and years, and even one of your testifiers said this will be the biggest step forward in 10 years, so that's a thing. Why isn't the department doing this already? And why do we need to have something in here that says this has to go to education finance to get money so they can do this when they should be doing it already? I mean, if this is something that has been discussed for over a decade, why is this something that we now suddenly, that the department is going to say, fine, I guess we'll do it now that you put it down in writing? So I guess that would be my question, Madam Chair.
Representative Hicks.
Well, I'm not going to speak for the department. And I've only been here for 1 year, so you've got twice the experience I do. But what I will say is that as many people, these poor ladies that came today from my district, they have to deal with me as the parent, okay? So bless them so many times. And so what I will say is that as a parent, in this special education space, and I think the advocates would probably agree, and if you asked other parents of kids on IEPs, especially kids on IEPs who maybe are not the ones that everybody really likes, right? We will tell you that when we talk about paperwork and we talk about efficiencies and we talk about all of that, we have to keep that student and parent focus so that we remember that the parent is an equal part of that team, right? Nothing is harder than walking into an IEP meeting as a parent and everybody around the table has the IEP that they're going to tell you need to approve for their child, and you haven't seen it, but you're supposed to be an equal partner, right? And so when we talk about paperwork and we talk about partnership, when we talk about all of that, we can't do that if we're only talking to our schools. or if we're only talking to our school boards, or if we're only talking to our teachers. We have to be talking to everybody. And I can't speak for the department, but what I can say as somebody who's been trying to make some movement in this space is that we got movement because we all got in the same room. And I think that we can continue that movement and make really meaningful changes that our schools will be on board with, our teachers will be on board with, and that our parents will feel included in if we continue that movement forward. And so that's why I added this part, because I'm afraid if we don't do this, we'll lose the momentum that we've worked so hard to get.
Follow up, Chair Pryor.
Representative Mueller.
Briefly, thank you. I couldn't agree more with what you said. I agree that there's so much that, you know, even when you suggest the idea of how do we reduce paperwork, there's an angst there to make sure that my child is still getting enough services and that they're getting what they need to be appropriate. I understand that. And all that you said makes a lot of sense, and all that you said is frankly common sense. And so I guess not directed to you, but in the ether that does exist here with MDE listening, this isn't new. This is not new. This is something that you should have been doing a long, long time ago. And so when I think about, as we are trying, and I'm not in education and finance, so I can't necessarily talk to that, but when we look at this, your role as MDE is to make sure that we are taking care of the most vulnerable. And you've already heard it for over 10 years. I can't believe it's taking 2024 a person to say, hey, let's go do your job now. Let's go do your job. So hopefully in the amount of money that you were given in 23 and the over 400 people that you have working in MDE, you can find someone to finally do your job. Thank you, Representative Hicks.
All right. Representative Bennett, any comments? Representative Joaquin, here we are.
Thank you, Chair Pryor. I just wanted to thank Representative Hicks for taking this monumental task on. I had heard from folks that there might be a chance to have some movement in this area, because 6 years ago when I was at policy chair, we did get some movement. It might not have been as monumental as Dave, but we did get one paperwork piece crossed off. And sometimes things take a long time to do that, and sometimes, like you said, it takes getting the right people in the room, and sometimes convening people takes a lot of time and energy from staff. So I don't mind paying people for the work that they do. So I'm glad that you have this bill moving forward. We look forward to hearing it in education finance and to see how much more we can get done so we can have another monumental year and making sure that our funds are being spent well on our children that need it the most. Thanks.
Thank you. Before we go to closing comments, I do want to say again how much we appreciate our testifiers that did stay until we were able to get to your bill. And we did some rearranging. I think they had expected to be on earlier. And your patience, but also your work. So we're so grateful for the work that you're doing. We're so grateful that the work that Representative Hicks has done on this bill. And we turn to you for closing comments.
Thank you so much, Chair and Committee. I am excited for the first step in what I hope will be bigger conversations. And if you look at the amendment and you look at some of the language, I just want to sort of point out that we really are looking at inclusion and evidence-based practices and making sure that we're paying for the right stuff. Let's make sure we're paying for the right stuff. So I really appreciate your hearing this so late in the day today and your attention. And I would appreciate a movement onto Ed Finance.
All right. And with that, Representative Weiss renews her motion to re-refer House File 3780 as amended to the Committee on Education and Finance. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, and the motion carries, and the bill is on its way to Education Finance. And if I can just ask for just another minute, please, members. We have a bill that You know, the slang, it's often referred to as the vehicle bill. It's just a bill that has some redundant language that we would like, could be removed from statute. It's House File 4501. Am I right on that?
Yep.
All right. That I would like to send to, I'm the author, I would like to send it to the floor to be available in case we need it. And with that, I would like to take a vote on House File 4501 to go to the general register. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. The motion carries. And with that, we are adjourned.